Thank you for joining us. I'm have the pleasure of speaking to Mr. Daniel Brown with the National Hurricane Center, and he is going to offer us some new information for the season. And every season, we need to catch up with the latest in technology and communications. Mr. Brown, can you give people an idea of what your position is at the Hurricane Center?
Yes, I'm one of the 10 hurricane forecasters here at the National Hurricane Center. I also serve as the Center's warning coordination meteorologist, meaning that I'm helping with all of our outreach and education during the off season, and then just helping coordinate those watches and warnings, both with local National Weather Service offices, as well as all the various countries that we help serve.
You mentioned other countries. I thought you only worked for the U.S. government.
No, we at the National Hurricane Center, we're part of the World Meteorological Organization, and we're designated as a regional specialized meteorological center, which just means that we provide forecasts and then also coordinate watches and warnings with 28 countries across the Caribbean, Central America, Canada, Mexico, Bermuda, and elsewhere out in the Atlantic. And so it can be really busy here at the Hurricane Center because we're, again, coordinating these watches and warnings for all these different countries, as well as the United States.
I understand that this year something new has been added to the advanced warning and that you've gone to 7 days. Now, is that, you feel comfortable with that, strong with that? Do we have enough science for that?
Yeah, so for the hurricane and tropical storm forecasts that we issue, those are going to still go out 5 days. But for the tropical weather outlook that we issue, which is a product we issue 4 times each day throughout hurricane season, it provides a look at where systems could form and then where they might go in effect over that 7-day period. So again, it's going to give a little bit more heads up about if we see a cluster of showers and thunderstorms maybe in the Gulf of Mexico, to say, hey, could that system form into a tropical storm or hurricane and then begin to affect your area? So we'll have a little bit more time to provide information about those systems.
When does the Hurricane Center put out its seasonal forecast or the outlook for the storm season?
So the Hurricane Center's seasonal outlook will be issued on May 25th. One thing that we are looking at is, what are those ocean conditions? You hear a lot about El Nino and La Nina. There's some potential that we're heading toward El Nino, which typically does reduce the number of tropical storms and hurricanes across the Atlantic. But we really don't want that to be a distraction because it only takes one hurricane to hit your area for it to be a bad hurricane season. And even in those El Nino years, we sometimes see systems form in the Gulf closer to home. One of those seasons, 1992, that we had El Nino conditions, we only had 7 named storms, 4 hurricanes, and 1 major hurricane. But that major hurricane was Hurricane Andrew, a Category 5 storm that struck South Florida. So again, the main takeaway when you hear the seasonal forecast is just to know the season is right around the corner. It's a really good time to go ahead and make all your preparation efforts and get prepared for you and your family and know what you're going to do this hurricane season.
Mr. Brown, were you on the forecast desk during Harvey?
I worked some of the shifts during Harvey, but not as many as with some of the other storms we've had. It's been such an active period over the last 7 hurricane seasons. We've had more Category 4 and 5 hurricanes strike the U.S. since 2016 than we did from 1963 all the way until 2016. So very busy, but I can certainly answer some questions about Harvey.
Well, how do you feel about that? I mean, we here in the coastal bend lived through that. Obviously, we saw what happened to Houston. Did we overwarn, underwarn? Did the people not follow the guidance? How do you feel? I mean, were you frustrated by the results?
I think Harvey, it was essentially a real complex storm. And I think we have to think about that when we think about tropical storms and hurricanes. It not only brought the wind and storm surge to areas around Corpus Christi, but then it slowed down and brought that heavy rainfall to places like Houston, Beaumont. And so it just shows that each hurricane is different and that we have to really consider all those hazards separately. There may be different things that you do to protect yourself from wind versus water. And when we talk about storm surge, we really want you, if you live near the coast in a storm surge evacuation zone, to move away from that area. But if you live in a well-built home that's not at risk for storm surge, you might be able to stay and protect yourself in that home. Again, flooding rainfall, though, we do want folks to stay out of flooded areas. Roadways, we've lost a lot of folks in recent years trying to drive through flooded areas during and after storms. So again, have to really think about each hazard and then stay safe from that hazard.
So I understand that you put out the storm surge advisories. Now, explain that to the people in real simple terms. Storm surge versus freshwater flooding, and the dangers of either.
Yeah, so storm surge is really the winds of the hurricane pushing that seawater onshore. So think of it as if you're in a swimming pool or bathtub and you take your arm and you sweep it across the surface of the water. That's what the hurricane is doing to push that water on shore. We saw that with Hurricane Ian last year in Southwest Florida, a significant, devastating storm surge. And if you hear a storm surge watch or warning, it's a newer warning that we're issuing at the National Hurricane Center and Weather Service. But when you hear that warning, just know that there's a risk of life-threatening storm surge. And that's when we want people to then evacuate, listen to your local officials and evacuate from that threat. Talking about rainfall, again, that's the water that's falling from the sky. The heavy rain that gets produced from a hurricane. Those can sit up in various bands. Sometimes local areas can get, a foot or 2 feet of rain. And it doesn't take a strong hurricane to get a lot of rain. So that's another thing to remember, that even tropical depression, a low-end tropical storm, we saw that with Imelda a few years ago. It barely became a tropical storm, yet it dumped nearly 2 feet of rain on parts of Texas just a couple of days later.
Here on the central Texas coast, we're sort of blessed by the barrier islands, and that helps Texas. Wouldn't you say that the barrier islands protect us?
The barrier islands are where the highest storm surge is likely to occur, but it can penetrate inland. It really, again, depends on the strength of the storm, but also the size of the storm. Last year for Ian, it was a strong Category 4 hurricane, but also quite large. And so it produced that devastating storm surge all the way from where it made landfall, really for about 60 or 75 miles south, all the way through the Fort Myers and Naples area. And it just, again, showed, if you lived along the coast, if you live in those barrier islands, live near the coast, find out if you live in an evacuation zone, know what your risk is for storm surge. And if that risk is present, find a place you can ride out that storm inland away from that risk.
And finally, there's a thing about people's homes. Shouldn't we know what our elevation is above mean sea level?
It can be helpful, especially for those living in those storm surge zones, those evacuation zones. But really, if you live in one of those zones and you're told to evacuate, it's a good thing to listen to those folks, because it means that there's a risk of flooding. Even if your house is built up a little bit, it could mean that your house becomes an island surrounded by water, something that's really not safe either. So again, the main message is, if you live in an evacuation zone, listen to those local officials. When they tell you to evacuate, do so. If you hear about a storm surge watch and warning, find out what the recommendation is from those local officials, and then just do what they're told.
Mr. Brown, thank you so much for your time. I guess we'll be seeing you later on in the season.
Yes, let's hope it's not a very impactful hurricane season, but if it is, let's all be ready this season.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.